When creating components, we need to think about how they are to be displayed. For components designed to be nested within other components, we need to define a selector as part of the component decorator. And then we nest the component within another component to define where it appears. The component does not need a route. For components designed to be displayed as a view within our single application page, the component needs no selector, but does need a configured route, and one or more user actions to activate that route. Some setup is required before we can use the component router. Be sure to include the Angular 2 router script. Define the base element telling the router how to compose the navigation URLs, and register the router providers in the appropriate location in the component hierarchy. Use the route config decorator to configure the routes. Note that this decorator name may be changing before release. Attach this decorator to any component used as a routing host. The key configuration properties are path, which defines the URL path segment for the route. This is the segment that appears in the address bar. This URL segment allows the user to bookmark and navigate back to a specific component's view using the browser's address bar or back buttons. Name is the name we'll use in the template or in code when referencing this route. The name must be Pascal case, meaning each word of the name is capitalized. Component is a reference to the component itself. It is not the string name and is not enclosed in quotes. Each referenced component must be imported. Set use as default to true to define the default route. Any component template can use the router link directive to tie a specific route to a user action. To use the router link, specify the router directives constant in the component decorator's directives array. Add the router link directive as an attribute to any clickable element in a component's template. We can use them in menu options, toolbars, buttons, links, images, and so on. Enclose the router link in square brackets. Bind the router link to a link parameters array. The first element of the link parameters array is the string name of the route. All other elements are route parameters. Use the router outlet to identify where to display the routed component's view. This is most often specified in the host components template. The most important thing to remember when passing parameters to a route is to use the same parameter name everywhere. Add the parameter to the route configuration path by specifying a slash, a colon, and the parameter name. Define the parameter value by adding it as an element of the link parameters array bound to the router link directive. Get the parameter value in the navigated component using the route params service. Be sure to import the service and define it as a dependency on the constructor. Notice here that the parameter name, ID in this example, is exactly the same in all three places. To activate a route with code, use the router service. Be sure to import the service and define it as a dependency on the constructor. Create a method that calls the navigate method of the router service instance and pass in the link parameters. Add a user interface element and use event binding to call the created method. This module was all about navigation and routing. We began with some setup steps. We then walked through how to configure routes, tie routes to actions, and define where the routed component's view should appear. We then covered some additional routing techniques, including passing parameters to a route and activating a route with code. Our app component had embedded our product list component as a nested component. In this module, we removed that nesting. We instead set up the app component to host a set of routes so the user can navigate between them. However, the product detail component and associated template are not finished. We only wired up the bare minimum to demonstrate routing. As a homework assignment, try building the remainder of the product details template and code. To check your answer, you can find the completed application on my GitHub as described in the First Things First module. There you'll also find a version of the product data service that retrieves one product by ID. Now let's circle back to the beginning. When we first set up Angular in the First Things First module, We skipped over the explanation of the setup files. Next up, let's revisit the Angular 2 setup process and look at these boilerplate files, what they are, how to use them, and when you'll want to change them.